All right, we talked a lot of offense yesterday on the Morning Pitt. Talked about what Pitt has in the 2025 recruiting class on that side of the ball, what they need on that side of the ball, what they're going to get on that side of the ball, how many we think they'll take on that side of the ball, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And I thought that yesterday's episode would be all about the whole recruiting class, that we would talk about what everything that Pitt needs on in the whole class, how they're going to fill out the rest of this thing. They got 21 commitments, and what are they going to do with the rest of this class going forward? But then we ended up spending more than our allotted 20 minutes of time talking about the offensive side of the ball. And so I thought we could do a little. So I was like, well, I guess we're going to split it up. Actually, we got to about 18 minutes, and I'm like, you know what? We're still talking about whether or not they're going to take two quarterbacks. So let's split this one up. Let's do offense one day, defense the next. So offense was yesterday. Today's defense. Let's talk a little bit of defensive recruiting here on the Morning Pitt. What does Pitt have so far? What do they need? What do we think they'll take? What do we think of the guys they already have? And what do we think they need to fill out this class and get it to be a good recruiting class that helps set sort of a foundation for this roster and this defense going forward? So let's talk defensive recruiting here on the Morning Pitt on youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. Yeah, it's Thursday. It's the 4th of July. Happy Independence Day. What do you usually wish people? You wish people happy 4th of July or happy Independence Day? Well, either way, it's the 4th of July, and this is our 4th of July episode of the Morning Pitt. My garbage is not going to get picked up until tomorrow, but we're still going to give you a Morning Pitt episode today because, hey, who takes a day off? Actually, we're going to take a lot of days off next week. We're going on vacation, but don't fret, Pitt fans. If you're like, Chris, you're going to be on vacation next week? How are we going to, what are we going to do without a Morning Pitt episode every day? I don't think that's actually what anyone would say, but just in case you would, fear not. I will have a Morning Pitt episode for you every day next week. We're doing a lot of work, trying to get a lot of work done ahead of time, and we'll have some pretty cool stuff for you next week. It might not necessarily be breaking news, but it'll be a little bit of Pitt content to get your day started every day. A little 20, 25-minute video and podcast, give you something, a little bit of Pitt stuff to talk about, Pitt stuff to think about. And it'll be right here at youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. So look, I'm going to go on vacation, and I'm still going to give you video content. The least you could do for me is like this video and subscribe to our YouTube channel. youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com is the place where we put all of our Pitt video content, like the live show like we did last night. We do that every Wednesday night. We're not going to do that next week. That one I'm calling off. Unless there's a very compelling reason to do so, we are not having a live show next Wednesday night. We will have Morning Pitt episode. We do it every week, except next week. Kind of moving back into that 8:30 to 9:30 time slot. That's what we did last night. I think we'll probably stick with that when we get back in 2 weeks. But we have the Morning Pitt videos every day. We have interviews and highlights and press conferences and all those things right here, youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. And don't forget the website, Panther-Lair.com, Pittsburgh.rivals.com. All right, let's talk defensive recruiting. A little bit here, what Pitt has in the recruiting class so far and what they need and what they're going to add and what we think of the guys they've got and all that kind of thing. But first, I have one other thing I want to say about Pitt's defense. All right, this came up on the message boards yesterday, and there was a conversation going on. I think we were talking about all the new commitments. It was the thread that we had posted about, I think I posted it on Tuesday, of thoughts on the new commitments and the guys that Pitt landed on Monday. And one of the posts in the thread, or a couple of the posts, actually, there were posts about Pitt's run defense last year. And it actually tied into some research, some things I had kind of dug up, I don't know, a couple weeks ago, a couple months ago, and never really got a chance to do anything with it. The legal pad gets filled up. I mean, just page after page of Pitt notes and minutia and bric-a-brac and whatnot. And some of the stuff I never get around to using. And I don't think I ever actually used this, but there's certainly a contention, not baseless, that Pitt's run defense was really bad last year. And I understand that. And I certainly came away from the season feeling that way. Wow, the run defense took a giant step back. It's a big part of the problem was the defensive tackles and the outside linebackers were bad at taking angles, and Bengali Kamara, who I spent all offseason hyping, was not good against all this stuff. And there's truth to that. You know what I mean? Virginia Tech attacked the perimeter. There's no question about it. Cincinnati attacked the perimeter. And they were successful in doing so. And they took advantage of the outside linebackers a little bit. But I definitely came away with the feeling the impression that Pitt's run defense took a step backward after being a strength of the team. One of the things that they were good at basically every year under Pat Narduzzi, they were not good at it last year. But it's interesting when you look at it. When you break down the numbers, you look at the numbers from last season, rushing attempts, and you take out the sacks, because in college football we count sacks as rushing attempts, and I don't necessarily. Some people really argue about that and feel like that's wrong. I see an issue with it. I don't think it gives a full picture of your rushing defense, but if we're going to count scrambles as rushing attempts, then I think we got to count sacks as rushing attempts. But I digress. If we take the sacks and the sack yardage out of the rushing totals, the rushing attempts and the rushing yardage, and to get as close as we can to comparing run defense in one year versus another, it's pretty interesting. Because if you look at last season, 2023, versus the year before, 2022, we have two seasons where I think in 2023 you would say, boy, Pitt's run defense was, Pitt's run defense was really bad in 2023, and it was really good in 2022. And I think when you compare those 2 years on the sort of sack removed rushing totals, kind of doesn't work out actually. Because actually last year's defense gave up fewer yards per carry than the year before. Last year they allowed 4.39 yards per rush on non-sack rushing attempts. The year before it was 4.77. So not a huge difference, but a 0.38 yard difference. The point being that 2023 was a lower number. The biggest difference in the rushing totals from last year versus the year before, and even the year before that, is the rushing attempts. Teams ran the ball more on Pitt last year than they did either of the previous years, like by a lot, like 130 more rushing attempts last season than we saw Pitt's opponents attempt in 2022. And mind you, 2022 they played one more game. They played 13 games. In 2023 they only played 12. And despite that, in 2023 with only 12 games, Pitt faced 130 more rushing attempts. And so And somebody on the message board said, well, clearly the point there is that teams felt like they could run, they could be successful running, and that's why they ran it more. Maybe, but I think if you ask Pat Narduzzi and Randy Bates, and I know because I asked Pat Narduzzi and Randy Bates, they would tell you that teams were content to run the ball more because they weren't afraid of Pitt's scoring offense. There was no concern that you would need to score a lot of points to beat Pitt last year. Pat Narduzzi said, teams would only be ahead by a touchdown, or maybe they'd be tied or even trailing, and they'd still be handing the ball off. No real urgency in their offense because they were pretty sure Pitt wasn't going to score all that much. So they could take their time, they could run the ball, and you end up with rushing totals like, I don't have the page still open, but, I think West Virginia, and Virginia Tech rushed the ball like 50 plus times last season. I think Syracuse had 65 rushing attempts. No, I mean Syracuse was a disaster. There's no question about it. Syracuse was a bad game for Pitt's run defense. Cincinnati was a bad game for Pitt's run defense. But on the whole, when you look at the rushing totals, it's not that crazy. You know what I mean? Most years, or most games, they didn't give up a ton of yards. I think the Cincinnati and Syracuse games were the only time they gave up more than 200 rushing yards. Virginia Tech piled up yards. I think ended up with 199 or something like that. But it came on 50-some carries. So, teams went for a volume attack against Pitt, and they weren't necessarily all that effective on a per carry basis. It's just when even if you only average 3 yards per carry, if you run the ball 60 times, you're going to have 180 yards. You'll be like, wow, look at all the rushing yards they got, even though they only averaged 3 yards per carry. And so I think that's important to keep in mind. When we talk about, this year's team versus last year's team, where does this year's team need to improve from last year? I think the run defense gets brought up a lot. Like, wow, they were just so bad against the run. And they were at times. There were moments, there were games where, Cincinnati and Syracuse would be the two I would highlight. I would circle those two and say, yeah, that was a bad game defensively. I mean, Syracuse obviously was a disaster. I think Cincinnati, they got run on. But for the most part, in the other 10 games, it wasn't too bad. It might not have been to the standard of the previous 8 seasons, but it wasn't as bad as it gets made out to be. So keep that in mind. The next time your friend tells you about how bad Pitt's run defense was last year, tell them, well, on a per carry basis, it was actually better than it was in 2022, with the biggest difference being that the opponents recorded 130 more non-sack rushing attempts. You'll sound really smart when you say that, and I don't even care if you credit me or not. You don't have to say, well, I heard from Chris, unless it's wrong, and then you can be like, well, Peak's a moron, and he told me that. So anyway, I didn't want to use the whole first half of this episode talking about that, but it was fresh in my mind because we just talked about it on the message board, and I think it's interesting. It's something to throw out there because I think the bad run defense gets brought up often as one of the indictments of the 2023 season, and I don't want you to lose sight of the main point that the Pitt's quarterback was the disaster of the 2023 season, more than any other element of the team, more than the punting, more than the run defense, more than the outside, whatever it is. It doesn't matter. Nothing else matters when you talk about Pitt football in 2023 than the lousy play at quarterback. So there's that. All right, let's talk about recruiting. Pitt's recruiting class 2025, they've currently got 21 commitments. And, as we said yesterday, a whole lot of those guys are on the offensive side of the ball. But I should have this number more readily available. 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 of the 21 are on defense. So pretty near even split. We think they'll probably add another offensive tackle, and it'll be a 12 and 10 split. But the question here is, what else do they need, and what else will they take on the defensive side of the ball? So what do they have so far? The way we break it down, they've got 2 defensive ends. Neither one of them is listed as a defensive end on Rivals.com. One is listed as a linebacker. That's Denham Cook. One is listed as an athlete. That's Julian Anderson. Both guys play sort of a stand-up role for their teams. Stand-up edge rusher. Julian Anderson's about 215 pounds. Denham Cook's 245. They both have to get bigger. Anderson has more room to grow than Cook, though, for sure. The one prospect who's listed as a defensive end in the Rivals database is Trevor Summers, Pitt's first commitment in the 2025 recruiting class. He's actually going to play defensive tackle, and he's the one tackle prospect in this class. They've got 2 linebackers, Emmanuel Taylor and Justin Thompson. Emmanuel Taylor listed as a wide receiver on Rivals, but he's going to be a linebacker at Pitt. And then they've got 3 cornerbacks and 2 safeties. And we've talked a lot about these guys this week. We talked about it, I think, on probably Tuesday or someday, I don't know, about the defensive back recruiting. The 3 corners, Elijah Dotson, Mason Alexander, and Sean Lee. And then the 2 safeties, Cole Woodson and Josh Gurrier. And, I think right off the bat, I'm pretty high on this defensive back recruiting class. I talked about it a lot earlier this week. 3 of those guys, Gurrier, or 2 of those DBs committed on Monday, Gurrier and Woodson. The other one's committed earlier. Dotson committed in May. Sean Lee committed after his official visit. Mason Alexander committed after his official visit. But I'm high on all of those guys. I think they have a chance to be really, really good. And I think the Pitt coaches are content to stop there. If they get a no matter what recruit who comes through, they would obviously take them. But I think if they can sign these 5 guys, and these are the 5 guys that end up in the 2025 recruiting class for Pitt, they'll be happy with that. Now, always comes with the caveat of, will they get all 5 of these guys to sign? Chances are, out of 21 current commitments, 3 or 4 probably are going to end up at another school before signing day. It happens. That's not an indictment on any of these guys. It's not a reflection on the coaching staff. It's just what happens. You're going to lose some guys. They always have. Last year, the 2023 class, at least, which was recruited 2 years ago, they lost some guys that really hurt. And Shelton Lewis and Bryce Pollock both played as true freshmen at Clemson and Mississippi State, respectively. You would hope you don't lose somebody who's going to go out and play as a true freshman, and I think you would hope you don't lose one of these 5 defensive backs because they all look really, really good. And I think the Pitt coaches are good with that group if that's who they finish with. They've got the 2 linebackers, Emmanuel Taylor and Justin Thompson. I'm inclined to say they could stand pat there if they want to. They signed 3 linebackers in the 2023 recruiting class, the guys who were freshmen last year, Jordan Bass, Rasheem Biles, and Braylon Lovelace. They're all sophomores now, plus Kyle Lewis from the previous class is a redshirt sophomore. So you got 4 guys with sophomore eligibility at linebacker, plus 3 linebackers who signed in the 2024 class, guys who are coming in to be freshmen right now, Davin Bruton, Cameron Lindsay, and Jeremiah Marcelin. Those 7 guys right there that I just named, Bass, Biles, Lewis, Lovelace, Bruton, Lindsay, and Marcelin. If you can keep those 7 guys together for the next 4 years, you are set. Well, I shouldn't say 4 years because the sophomores are only going to be your sophomore, junior season, 3 more years. But if you keep those 7 guys as the nucleus of your linebacking core for the next 3 years, you are going to be set and have one of the best groups of linebackers in the ACC. I really believe that. I mean, I think those guys are going to be really good. I think they're going to be really good this year. I don't know how much the freshmen will play. I don't know how much the freshmen will need to play because with Bass, Biles, Lewis, and Lovelace, in addition to Brandon George and Key Thompson, I mean, I think that's a loaded linebacker group. I really do. And I know, caveat emptor, when it comes to me hyping up linebackers, I won't argue with you if you want to be like, dude, I heard you all of last season tell me how Bengali Kamara was going to be a first-round draft pick. Forgive me if I'm not buying in on your linebacker hype. I got no complaints about that. I can't argue with that. It didn't work out. But these guys look really good, and I think it's going to work out. I might have been wrong last year, but I think I'm going to be right this year. Either way, I mean, this is a really good group. I don't know if they need a third linebacker in this class. If they can get a third one, I think they would take it. Following up or started building off a conversation we had a week ago, I think you really don't want to limit yourself all that much in terms of numbers. I think you take the guys you can get. If there are players you feel are good enough to play for you and help you win the ACC, you take them. You figure out the numbers later because inevitably the numbers are going to change. The number of spots you have available next January, next February, next March is going to be different than the spots you think you will have available right now. And so take the guys you can get. The numbers you'll figure the numbers out. There's to some extent you have to throw caution to the wind and get as many good players as you can. So if they can get another good linebacker, go get them. Otherwise, if they settle with Thompson and Taylor, I think they'll be all right. I think that's a good linebacker class. But we're burying the lead here because it's not about the defensive backs and it's not about the linebackers. It's about the defensive line. And right now, Pitt's got 2 defensive ends committed. Neither one of them plays with his hand on the ground in high school. And they've got 1 defensive tackle committed. And I think Trevor Summers mostly plays defensive end in high school, although we'll see if he gets a little bit more time at D tackle this year. I almost feel like there's no point in asking the question, do they need more defensive linemen? The answer is yes, and the answer will continue to be yes for a while. Even though they went out and got 4 transfers this offseason. Even though in last year's recruiting class they signed 5 guys. They still need more. They still need more. Because there have been so many holes and misses in the previous few years. And I mean, we can go year by year. 2021 recruiting class. I mean, this one hurts the most, right? Elliot Donald, Nakai Johnson, Dorian Ford, Naquan Brown. I mean, that was going to set the tone for the future of Pitt's defensive line. It was one of the best defensive line classes they had ever signed. Brown is transferred. Ford is transferred. Johnson moved from end to tackle, and Donald hasn't really done anything. That's hurting right now. And they need Donald and Johnson to step up, one and or both, to step up this year. 2022 recruiting class. It's kind of this, numbers-wise, they had Sean Fitzsimmons, Jimmy Scott, and Sam Okunlola. Okunlola transferred. Fitzsimmons and Scott are still here. They need those guys to step up, but that's 2 guys from the recruiting class. So 2 guys from the 2021 recruiting class are still here. 2 guys from the 2023 recruiting class are still here. And then you move forward to 2 guys from the 2021 recruiting class are still here. 2 guys from the 2022 recruiting class are still here. You move forward. You look at the 2023 recruiting class. I mean, there's Isaiah Neal, one of the most promising young linemen on the team, 4-star defensive tackle prospect. That's great. Antonio Kamen, he's already gone. Maverick Grazio, I don't know, man. Don't know what's going to happen there. And then, so you go to 2024, this recruiting class coming in now as freshmen. Obviously Jasir Whittington and Francis Brew, 4-star defensive tackle prospects. That's awesome. Sincere Edwards, a 4-star defensive end prospect. That's great. Zachary Crothers, a really productive defensive end coming out of Florida. And then Ty Uhas, the Central Catholic defensive lineman, could play end, could play tackle. We'll see where he ends up. But when you look at it, the 2021, 22, and 23 classes, you've only got 2 guys from each of those classes still on the roster. There's big holes that you have to fill. So even though they signed 5 guys last year, this incoming freshman class, I mean, I think they need more. But the problem is, I'm not really sure what defensive tackle, at least, prospects are still out there. You look at some of the guys they've offered, there's a few that are still on the board, but not much. And they didn't have anybody else take official visits this in June. And so, I mean, we've talked about this off and on over the last couple of weeks about the defensive tackle situation. I think they need more. I just don't know if they're going to be able to get them. I'm just not really sure that those options exist. And so it might be back to the transfer portal. And though they were able to supplement things a little bit with Nick James, he's a redshirt sophomore, so he's got 3 years of eligibility, including this season. That helps. David Ojebwe is a defensive end. It's a redshirt freshman. He's got eligibility. So this is good, but you're just. I feel like you have to atone for the sins of the past when it comes to defensive line recruiting and how these guys have panned out and how a whole bunch of them haven't, or they've transferred, or they've just not made it. So that's a tricky situation. So what else do we see them taking on the defensive side of the ball? They only have 10 recruits. Offense is got the majority of the class so far. I see no reason for Pitt to stop at 22 commitments or 23. I mean, there's no reason to fall short of 25 in this class. So I think you have to go for it. I think you have to find more defensive line recruits, more guys you can project as defensive linemen. If it means taking more big outside linebackers like Denham Cook, find guys like that. If it means taking some DNs who are maybe a step too slow to play D-end at the next level, but they can move inside and play D-tackle, go find guys like that. And you know what? If you're not going to be able to get Francis Brew, Jasir Whittington, and Sincere Edwards in every class, and Isaiah Neal, if you're not going to be able to get that caliber of player in every class, then you might as well take a whole bunch of them and hope, take 5, take 6, take 7, and hope that 3 or 4 pan out. I don't think they're going to end up with 7 defensive linemen in this class, but I think if you take less than 4, or really even less than 5, I mean, I think you're I would almost go so far as to say you're doing a disservice to the future of the defensive line room. And you're putting a whole lot of pressure on getting those evaluations exactly right. And I'm not sure that I don't know if you got those evaluations exactly right. There's a lot of projection already with Denham Cook, Julian Anderson, and Trevor Summers. So that's an area that has to be addressed. They're going to have to address it in the transfer portal regardless next offseason. But that's an area that has to be addressed in the recruiting class more so than they have already done. And I'm a little surprised they didn't bring in more defensive linemen for official visits in June. But we'll see what they're able to do as far as bringing guys in over the course of the fall and see if they can land guys going into December. All right, that's the state of the defensive recruiting. We'll see what else Pitt adds here as they move forward. And then tomorrow we'll have our Morning Pitt mailbag. Like I say, we'll be on vacation next week, but we'll have plenty of Morning Pitt content for you, plenty of content on Panther-Lair.com. There's lots of Pitt stuff for you to read and consume and enjoy at Panther-Lair.com and right here on YouTube.com/Panther-Lair.com. So like this video and subscribe to our YouTube channel. Don't miss any of our video content. Thanks so much for watching today. Hope you've had a great week so far. Enjoy your Thursday, and we will catch up with you tomorrow for the Morning Pitt mailbag right here, YouTube.com/Panther-Lair.com.